There was this phrase that I always heard when I was a kid, and it always really pissed me off. The phrase is, "I hate it when people try to shove religion down my throat." And I don't know why this was always so frustrating to me. Maybe it was just, it pissed me off that people, got so butthurt when you tried to talk about theology or beliefs with other people. Maybe it was because a handful of salty street preachers made the whole practice of preaching the gospel seem uncool and tasteless. But I think the biggest reason why that phrase pissed me off and continues to piss me off is it makes it sound like I had my religion shoved down my throat, and I categorically did not. When I got saved, I was a 13-year-old in the middle of rural North Carolina. And the church that I went to was this tiny little Foursquare church, pastored by a man without any kind of college degree or seminary education. And that was true for most of the congregation. There were only a few people in that church who had any kind of college degree. My parents were two of them. And so when I was coming of age and starting to ask all these questions about theology and morality and heaven and hell and all of this, I would go to my pastor and other people in the church, and I realized very quickly that they didn't have the kinds of answers that I was looking for, or they didn't have the depth of answers that I was looking for. So that forced me to go and study on my own. So it was at a pretty early age that I was, flipping open concordances and going to theology libraries and trying to teach myself this religion that I really had fallen in love with. And I did that pretty successfully. My experience was different from a lot of my peers, where I know that for a lot of kids, they felt like religion was forced upon them by their youth pastor or their parents or by their bishop or priest. And my experience was just not that. It was my own. My entire life for several years was fixated on the question of, given that Christ is Lord, how do I live my life most consistently with that truth? So I began making it a point to spend an hour in prayer or worship every day. I quit watching TV because I felt like it was a waste of my time when I could be devoting myself to, more spiritual practices. I quit watching pornography. I mostly quit playing video games. I gave up sugar. I did all of these things, and nobody prompted me. There was nobody telling me, hey, you need to do this or you're going to go to hell. This was from my own research, owning my faith, looking at the scriptures, saying, this is how I ought to live. And having a faith that was fostered and cultivated by me instead of by a relative or a loved one gave me a different kind of view on life and the world and the church. So having a faith like this that was fostered by me, by myself, not by somebody else, I think is very important. My religion never hindered on people, and I think that deviates from a lot of other people's experiences. I've heard a lot of former Christians say, well, yeah, my pastor cheated on his wife, and then I realized that God's not real. Or I'll hear non-religious people say like, oh, I don't go to church because church people are so hypocritical and mean. But I was really young when I was able to look out over this sea of people in these pews and see that these were broken, hurting, uneducated people, and that by some miracle Christianity was actively making them better. And so whenever somebody in church did something shitty, it never came to me as like, oh my God, this religion might not be true. It was like, well, of course they're going to do shitty things. They're people, obviously. That's what the gospel is for. So, my youth pastor did cheat on his wife. I had an evangelist who, committed suicide. I had pastors who divorced their wives and got themselves into a whole bunch of mess. But that never made me want to deconvert, because it wasn't like I saw them as gurus who had all of the answers, and now that they did one wrong thing, the jig was up and like the religion is fake. That wasn't my experience. Instead, I saw these broken, humble people fumbling through their life and and Jesus was making them better. I'm able to look back at some of those people and say, like, damn, he really was bettered by the gospel. One of my favorite stories to tell is about our children's church pastor. He was a former neo-Nazi. To this day, he's still got like a swastika tattooed on his arm. And the gospel was able to take that man and turn him into this teddy bear of a human, who is now, like making sure that kids are safe and cared for and hearing the gospel and working with prison ministries, often run by people of color. And there's not a whole lot of things in the world that can make a person change like that. I know that when I say that I'm an atheist who loves religion, I get a lot of, weird stares and glares, and I get that. But I wanted to give a little bit of context why I don't hate the church. And it's primarily because religion was never shoved down my throat.